You've been told that when someone pulls back, you should run after them, and that is exactly the pattern that keeps them distant. Here is the part nobody really explains. The avoidant person in your life is not damaged, not cold-hearted. They are fully capable of texting first, calling you just because they miss your voice, and staying consistent over time. But it doesn't happen for the person who is always instantly available. It doesn't happen for the one who removes all space. It happens for the person who creates a feeling in them that they cannot easily define. And today, you are going to understand how that works. Stay with this, because once you see it clearly, you will never look at relationships the same way again. Now let's go inside what is actually going on in their mind. People with avoidant patterns usually learned very early that depending on others leads to discomfort. Not because someone directly told them, but because every time they needed closeness, something felt unsafe, ignored, or too much. Over time, they built a strong internal shield. That shield has one purpose only: to stop them from feeling the pain of needing someone who might not stay. But that does not mean they don't want connection. In fact, the desire is strong, sometimes even stronger than most people realize. The problem is trust. So when intimacy gets close, their system reacts. They step back, not because they dislike you, but because it feels like too much emotion too fast. And here is where things start to shift. Every time you chase them, every time you double text, ask if something is wrong, or try to fix the distance immediately, you are unintentionally teaching their mind that closeness equals pressure. So they retreat further, not out of punishment, but out of self-protection. But when you stop doing that, when your energy shifts and you are no longer constantly reaching, something very different happens inside them. A pause, a question, a quiet curiosity like, where did they go? And that moment is powerful, not because it is manipulation, but because it changes the emotional pattern. You are no longer overextending yourself to stay close. You are simply present in your own space again. And that is what starts to change the dynamic. Stay with me, because this is where it really begins to shift. Here is the deeper principle most people miss completely. Your availability shapes how you are experienced. When something is always there, it slowly fades into the background. Not because it has no value, but because the mind stops feeling urgency around it. Human attention is drawn to contrast, to space, to the possibility of loss. And if you have been constantly available, responding instantly, always adjusting your time to keep connection alive, then there is no contrast left, no space, no emotional tension. And without that, the dynamic becomes one-sided. You are giving more presence than they are emotionally meeting. So instead of increasing pursuit, the shift begins with restraint, not coldness, not disappearing, just balance. You stop over-explaining your silence. You stop over-correcting every small distance. You allow room for them to notice your presence without you forcing it into their awareness every moment. And strangely, that space creates curiosity. It creates reflection. It makes them wonder about you in a different way, not because you are playing a trick, but because you are no longer oversaturating the connection. And this is where real change begins, because attraction is not built only through closeness. It is also shaped by breathing room. Stay with this, because what comes next changes everything about how you show up in relationships. Adjusts their schedule, always tries to make things work, always bends their time to stay connected, and it comes from a good place, but it sends a very different signal to an avoidant mind. What they register is not love, but pressure, not care, but expectation, not connection, but something that feels like it will slowly take over their space, and so they step back. Not because they don't feel anything, but because it feels safer for them. But when you become someone who has their own rhythm, when you sometimes reply after a while because you are genuinely busy living your life, not performing distance but actually being occupied, the energy shifts. You are no longer hovering. You are not waiting around the clock. You are someone with movement, with direction, with a world outside of them. And that is what changes how you are experienced. The goal is not to act unavailable. The goal is to be full, to have a life so real and active that your attention naturally feels meaningful, not automatic, and that changes everything. Now let's bring it into real life. You stop replying in seconds every single time, not as a strategy, but because you are not glued to your phone, because your day has flow, Because sometimes you are in the middle of something important and you answer when you can. When they text late at night after days of silence, you don't need to rush in immediately. You can respond later, not to create distance on purpose, but because your life doesn't revolve around timing someone else's presence. Here is something that feels strange at first. When they go quiet, your instinct is to fill the gap, to send another message, to check in, to soften the silence. But the real shift happens when you don't. When you stop trying to erase the gap instantly, that silence starts to breathe, and in that space, something begins to form. Because emptiness is not neutral. It creates awareness. It makes absence noticeable. And if you are no longer rushing to cover it, they start to feel that space in a different way. Stay with this, because this is where most people lose control of themselves without even realizing it. Now, the second idea is just as important, maybe even more. It is about how you show up when you are actually there. Many people get this wrong. They think the answer is to become cold, distant, or less emotionally present overall, but that just creates a flat dynamic where nobody really connects. That is not attraction. That is avoidance mirrored back. The real shift is learning to be fully present in moments of connection, and then fully back in your own life when that moment ends. When you talk to them, you are actually there. You are listening, reacting, laughing, sharing something real. In that moment, they feel your attention completely. No distraction, no half presence, and then the interaction ends, and you return to your world without chasing what just happened. No overthinking every word. No checking your phone repeatedly. You simply move on with your day. And this contrast creates a strong emotional imprint. Not because you are playing hard to get, but because your presence has weight and your absence has space. That combination is rare. It feels balanced. It feels grounded. And over time, it changes how they respond to you. You stop becoming someone they feel overwhelmed by and start becoming someone they feel drawn toward. Stay with this, because the next part explains why this pattern hits so deeply at a psychological level. Saying those conversations are not always the right move in the early stages, because timing and delivery matter a lot when you're dealing with someone whose first instinct under emotional pressure is to shut down. Deep emotional talks, especially the kind that feel like demands for clarity or commitment, can trigger their defense system. The moment they sense emotional pressure or being cornered, they pull back, not because they don't care, but because their system reads it as overload. And every time that happens, the pattern strengthens. Instead of creating closeness, it creates distance. So what actually works is something much lighter, much more natural. Low pressure, easy energy. When you reach out, don't make it heavy. Don't make it about defining the relationship or unpacking feelings. Make it about life, something real, something simple. A funny moment from your day, a random thought you had, a question that sparks curiosity, or a shared memory that naturally brings a smile. Things that don't feel like emotional weight, but still create connection. This is not about pretending or playing a role. It is about understanding that with this kind of person, connection doesn't always happen head on. It often happens indirectly. It slips in quietly when there is no pressure, when they are relaxed, when they are laughing without realizing they are opening up. That is when the bond starts forming in a real way. Not in intense talks, but in repeated light moments that build something slowly and naturally over time. Stay with this, because this is where most people either build attraction or break it without noticing. Now here is where things get very important. Once you start seeing small changes, maybe they reply a bit faster, maybe they initiate more often, maybe the tone becomes warmer. This is the point where most people lose balance. They get excited and they rush. They try to turn progress into commitment too quickly. They push for answers, labels, clarity, or emotional declarations before the foundation is actually stable. And that is exactly where everything falls apart. The simple rule is this: when they come closer, you meet them there, but you do not exceed it. If their effort increases, you match it. If they open up a little, you open up a little, but you do not suddenly flood the connection with everything you've been holding inside. You do not accelerate the emotional pace just because you feel relief. Instead, you let things build step by step, because what is really happening when an avoidant starts leaning in is testing. They are checking the environment. They are asking without words, is this safe, or will I feel trapped again? And your response determines everything. If you rush them, they retreat. If you stay steady, they stay curious. The person who remains calm in that phase usually sets the tone for what comes next. Stay with this, because the next insight explains something most people never notice about emotional energy in relationships. Your emotional state is not invisible, it spreads. It shows up in how you text, how quickly you reply, how you interpret silence, even in the small pauses you take before responding. When you are anxious inside the connection, when your sense of worth is tied to their attention, that energy leaks out in subtle ways. It becomes pressure without words. And avoidant people are extremely sensitive to that kind of emotional atmosphere. They may not explain it, but they feel it instantly. It reminds them of emotional intensity they learned to avoid. So they step back. But when your internal state is steady, when you are not over-attaching your value to their behavior, when you are genuinely grounded in your own life, something different happens. Your energy becomes lighter to be around. There is no urgency in it, no chasing, no emotional demand underneath the surface, just calm presence. And that is what allows them to stay closer without feeling overwhelmed. Stay with this, because this final shift is what separates temporary interest from real lasting connection. I hope this leads somewhere, and I also know I will be okay if it doesn't. That mindset alone shifts everything. It changes how you show up, how you speak, how you wait, how you don't wait. They can feel it without you even saying it directly, and honestly, it becomes one of the most powerful energies you can carry. But this is not about pretending you are fine when you are breaking inside. That is not the point at all. This is about actually building a life where you are fine, where your emotional stability does not depend on one person's replies or timing. And that work is real, not theoretical. It looks like investing in friendships that actually nourish you. It looks like working on goals you have delayed for too long. It looks like taking care of your mind, even if that means speaking to someone professionally. It looks like building routines, hobbies, direction, identity. A life that feels full on its own, so that one person's inconsistency does not shake your entire world. And when that happens, something interesting follows. You don't just become more attractive to one person. You become more grounded in yourself, and that changes how everyone responds to you, including how you respond to yourself. Stay with this, because this is where things start to feel very different. Now let's talk about what to do when they actually show up, because this is where most people lose all the progress they built. When they finally text, finally call, finally reappear after distance, the instinct is to immediately bring up everything, to react to the silence, to ask why they disappeared. Even small jokes about it can carry pressure, but that usually ruins the flow. Instead, you stay present with what is happening right now. You respond warmly, naturally, without dragging the past into the moment. You keep it light and human. You engage with what they are offering in that exact interaction, not the gap before it. And what that does is powerful. It teaches them something different. That being in contact with you does not come with emotional consequences or explanations they have to defend themselves against. It feels simple. It feels safe. It feels like they can just be there without tension, and slowly that becomes something they associate with you. A place where connection does not feel like pressure. And stay with this, because this is where attachment starts to shift in a real way. But here is something very important to understand. Not every person who pulls away is actually capable of building what you want. Some people are still too locked in their patterns, too inconsistent, too unavailable internally to offer real stability. And part of your growth is being able to see that clearly. Not everyone is meant to be a long-term connection, no matter how strong the initial feeling is. Your role is not to fix, chase, or reshape someone into readiness. Your role is to stay rooted in your own value, so you can recognize when someone is moving toward you versus just orbiting your attention. And when you see that someone is not meeting you halfway, despite patience and effort, you need the clarity to step back. Not from anger, not from games, but from self-respect. Because the most powerful position you can ever hold in connection is the ability to leave without collapse. Not as a tactic, but because your life is already complete without that uncertainty. And that energy alone changes how people perceive you. It signals stability. It signals value. It signals that access to you is not endless. And sometimes, when someone truly feels that, they choose to step forward before the space closes. Not all of them, but the ones who are actually capable of growth. Now let's talk about texting, because this is where everything either strengthens or breaks. Over-texting is one of the most common mistakes, even when you know better. So here is the real shift. You do not aim to keep conversations alive endlessly. You aim to end them at their strongest point. Not when they are fading, not when you are forcing energy, but when things feel good, warm, and alive. That is when you naturally pause. You leave the conversation on a high note, not a drained one, and that creates a pull. They remember the feeling and want to come back to it. Think of it like something episodic. The best moments are not stretched until they lose meaning. They end right when you want more. And that is exactly how connection works too. And when you do text, keep it simple but meaningful. Not heavy, not emotionally loaded, not long explanations, just real, light, interesting communication that feels easy to read and easy to respond to. Avoid questions that create pressure or force emotional accountability in the moment. Instead of demanding explanations, you create space for natural engagement. And here is a truth that is hard but important. Sometimes the reason someone is not consistently reaching out is because the connection has slowly become something that feels like responsibility instead of choice. And no one wants to feel like they are carrying someone else's emotional balance. When you remove that weight, when you stop needing constant reassurance and start simply enjoying the connection when it appears, everything changes shape. The interaction becomes lighter, more natural, more free. And that is where real connection actually has room to grow. Able to maintain. They stop feeling like every interaction is a commitment they are trapped in. Showing up no longer feels like signing an emotional agreement they didn't fully choose. And when that pressure drops, many of them naturally begin to reach out more, not because they are being pushed, but because it finally feels like something they want to do freely. Now there is something deeper underneath all of this, something you really need to hear clearly. This situation is not only about them, it is also about you. And I want you to stay with this part for a moment. You are drawn to this person partly because of their inconsistency. That pull you feel, that intensity, that emotional up and down, it is not random. There is something familiar in it, something your system recognizes as love, even if it also hurts you at the same time. And that pattern did not start here. It was shaped long before this relationship, likely in earlier experiences where connection felt uncertain, where attention had to be earned, where closeness came and went without stability. This is not a flaw in you, it is a learned emotional pattern, a very human one. But once you can see it, you are no longer stuck inside it unconsciously. You start noticing the difference between calm love and intense uncertainty. You start realizing that the nervous excitement you associate with connection is not always healthy attachment. And in that awareness, something powerful opens up. You can begin choosing differently. You can start leaning toward people who are steady, present, emotionally available, and still feel real interest in them, even if it feels unfamiliar at first. Because part of the real shift is retraining what love feels like to you. Not chaos, not confusion, but consistency. And that is not easy work, but it is the work that changes everything that comes after. Now, does this mean you must completely walk away from the avoidant person in your life? Not automatically, but it does mean you stop approaching them from need, from emotional hunger, from the hope that they will finally complete something inside you. Instead, you meet them from fullness, from self-respect, from interest without desperation. And when you operate from that place, only two things can happen. Either they adjust to your new energy and begin showing up with more effort, more consistency, more clarity, or they reveal that they were never capable of that kind of connection in the first place. And either outcome gives you something important, clarity, and with clarity you regain control of your direction. Stay with this, because this is where everything starts to simplify. Now let's bring this into real life. This is not just understanding, this is daily practice. Every single day, you put energy into your own world. You build something outside of this connection. You meet friends, you work on your goals, you take care of your body, you create, you learn, you move forward in your life in ways that actually matter to you. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, but because your life deserves attention, regardless of who is or isn't texting you. And before you reach out to them, you pause and check yourself. You ask honestly, am I doing this from calm interest or from anxiety, from connection or from fear of losing them? And if the answer feels anxious, you don't force the message. You step back. You redirect that energy into yourself first, because the version of you that texts from anxiety is not the version that builds strong connection. You only reach out when you are steady, when it feels natural, when it is an addition to your day, not a solution to your emotions. And over time, this becomes a new pattern of living. You are no longer reacting, you are choosing. You are no longer waiting to be picked. You are becoming someone who would pick themselves first. And something subtle but powerful starts to happen when you live like this consistently. You become less emotionally dependent on one outcome. You stop needing constant reassurance. You feel more like yourself again, more grounded, more clear, and that energy changes how you are experienced. It is not something you can fake or force. It comes from actually living differently, from building a life that is not centered around one person's attention. And when that energy is real, it becomes noticeable. You start to carry yourself differently in conversations, in silence, in waiting, in letting go. And here is the final truth to hold on to. The goal was never to control someone into texting more or to use tricks to get attention. The real goal is to become someone whose life is so full, so steady, so self-assured that connection becomes a choice, not a need. Someone who adds value to relationships instead of searching for value inside them. And when you reach even part of that place, everything changes. Not just how they respond to you, but how you respond to yourself. Stay with this, because this is where real change actually begins. Their heart. But what you can do is shape the environment where opening up feels safe, where it feels like a choice instead of pressure, where being close to you does not feel like danger, but instead feels like something worth leaning into. That is the real work here. It is not about forcing emotion or pulling someone in. It is about becoming the kind of presence where closeness feels natural, where distance does not feel like escape, and where losing you feels heavier than the fear of staying. And this process always begins with you. It moves through you. And in the end, it also returns to you. Because all the texts, all the calls, all the moments of connection, they are not the root. They are just reflections of who you are becoming on the inside. When you become more grounded, more steady, more fully yourself, the right connections respond to that without effort. You don't have to chase what is aligned with you. You grow into it. Stay with this. Because this is the real shift most people miss. You are not meant to spend your energy running after someone's attention. You are meant to expand into your own life so fully that attention becomes something that meets you, not something you hunt for. And when you actually start living that way, something changes in your nervous system, in your presence, in how you show up every day. You stop sitting in constant anticipation. You stop checking your phone like it holds your worth. You stop waiting in emotional pause. Instead, you are active in your own direction, building, creating, connecting, living, and in that state, the dynamic flips naturally. You are no longer the one waiting for a message to decide your mood. You are someone who is already moving, already engaged, already whole in your own rhythm. And that is when the other person starts to feel the shift too, not because you told them, not because you demanded it, but because your energy is no longer anchored to their response. And here is what often happens next. When you are no longer chasing, when you are no longer overextending, when you are no longer emotionally dependent on every reply, you become noticeable in a different way. There is calm in your presence. There is space around you. There is something steady that wasn't there before. And that steadiness creates curiosity. It creates reflection. It creates a kind of pull that is not forced, but felt. But the deeper truth is this. The goal was never to control someone into choosing you. The goal was to become someone who does not abandon themselves while waiting to be chosen. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, everything else starts to reorganize around that truth. And over time, this becomes your baseline. You are no longer performing patience or pretending detachment. You are actually living a fuller life. You are actually okay whether someone texts or doesn't. You are actually building days that matter to you beyond this one connection. And in that space, something powerful happens. You stop shrinking your life around uncertainty. You stop over-investing in inconsistency. You start choosing yourself in real time, not just in theory. And ironically, that is what makes connection feel more real, not less, because now it is not coming from lack, it is coming from overflow. Stay with this, because this is where everything turns